Sometimes on the Topcon D2 there are a couple of components that are made out of plastic, or they have a plastic component to it, and they will crack. And the filter wheel has a plastic ring around it, and it will crack. And also the gear, the miter gear that's involved in turning the diaphragm adjustment, it has a plastic gear on it, and that will crack. Now if this is cracked, it's not as big a deal because the detent is not affected by this. You can keep turning it and you will notice no difference because the detent is underneath, and that's where it clicks to stop on the appropriate color. So changing this is not as essential as changing the miter gear, because when you're turning your diaphragm knob, you're going to feel this crack every time it comes around. When it hits the other gear, you will feel a little hesitation, and it won't be smooth. So these are usually more replaced than the filter wheel, and so we're going to do that. There's two gears, one in different position, and we're going to look at those. So the first thing you would want to do is take off your light assembly just by taking this, loosening this screw and pulling it up. Don't forget to unhook your cables when you take the light assembly off. Now underneath, we're going to have to take this cover off. Yours might have a screw on here underneath to hold this cap on, this cover, or it may not. But this one does. This is an older one. And on each side, little tabs. Just squeeze those. Pull the cap off. Here's a miter gear, and here's a miter gear. This is miter gear A. This is miter gear B. They're different. They're not the same. Before we start taking anything apart, something that's probably good to do is to notice how everything is. Notice, maybe take pictures of how everything is put together, so that when you put it back together, you want to put it back the same way. You'll see the wire harness, how it's locked in under this plate. It's on the inside of this little plate, where this is sticking on the outside, and this is at an angle because this is pushing up against here. So you'll know when you put your harness back on, if you have this angle right, then these things are right. These are little things, but if you want to put it back together the way the factory did, then do that. And this is good because this is firm. If you were not to put this like this, then this would be wobbling and maybe get in your way. And another thing we're going to look at is, it's good to have a little reference point. And on these fixation adjustment axles, you'll notice on the knobs there's a little lock screw on each side. And you might notice that it's right at the 0.3 mark on both sides. So we're going to allow that to be our reference. And we're going to line up that 0.3 with the dot on the side. So we're just going to let that be our reference point when it's time to realign or readjust the position of our fixation, the gears. And what this little 0.3 indicates is the smallest size of your diaphragm. So that 0.3, when it's right at that dot, is going to be indicating the smallest pinhole on your diaphragm wheel. So when you're adjusting everything, if you're looking through it and you're at your smallest pinhole, that's your 0.3. And there's a click stop for each of these. But then when it gets to we'll call this the well, there will be a click stop right here at the 1 and the 14. So you'll notice on your knob you're going to have two 14s. You're going to have a small 14, and that's going to coincide with this spot, the stop of this well, and then your next 14 is going to be the largest diaphragm. So you're going to have a click stop at each one of these, but when you get to the well, this just slides. This is a gradual adjustment, but it stops on the 1 and the 14. But I'm just showing you that so you can see what's going on, why there's smaller numbers and why there are bigger numbers on your knob. But that's the 0.3. So when we're looking at 0.3, that's a stop, and also the 1 right after it. That's a 1. But then it doesn't click until it gets to the small 14. That's the big end of the well, and then that's your largest diaphragm, the 14, and it keeps going down. So I just wanted to show you that in case you were wondering, and it might help you later. It will help you later to adjust it when you're having to put these gears back and you're wondering if you've got them lined up correctly. Okay, now we can take off our wire harness. Since we've looked at it, we've made notes, we're seeing what it's going to look like, we can just go ahead and take this out. You don't have to take it completely out, but we do need to take that off. We can go ahead and take this assembly apart to get it out of our way. And this is not really in the way. You could just bend this down. So on here, on this mechanism, we have a lock nut here, and on this miter gear A, you're going to have 2 Allen screws to hold it in, but you don't have any on this one. So if we look at the 0.3, we'll notice that there's going to be access to these screws, to these lock nuts. And this might be what the factory does when they tighten these up, is they might set it on this point and then tighten it up. But that's going to be later. But we're going to be taking this this axle out, but we're going to leave this knob on. We're just going to leave that because that's just what we're going to leave on. We don't need to take that off. We're going to be pulling the rod out. We're going to be loosening these screws, pulling the rod out so we can take the miter gear off this axle. But we have a lock nut here and this knob, so we can take this knob off. And this is going to be the 1.5, the smallest on this set. Now, this is a very small set screw in this lock nut, and you're going to have to make sure you get one of this size, either a 0.9 mil or 0.035 Imperial American. And so you're definitely going to need one of those if you're going to work on this. So I just happen to have one, and I've already loosened it. It's this little set screw in this lock nut is going to have some lock substance on that screw to keep it from turning, so you may have to use some acetone to loosen that glue before you try to insert your Allen wrench. Now, I've already done this, so it's going to be loose for me, but it might be tight for you, and you're going to have to put it in here and break it. Break that first tightness. Just loosen it enough to release it off of those threads. So once you have that loose, you can just grab it with some pliers, and we can unscrew it using our knob on the other side, and we'll just unscrew it, and it's unscrewing this nut at the same time. Okay, once you have that lock nut released, you can't pull it out yet until we remove the axle. If this moves and you've already gotten off position, which is going to happen, that's not the big deal. We're going to find out. We're going to adjust our position later. So regardless of if this turns prematurely before, if this gear turns and it looks like it's got out of position, that's okay, because we're going to do it. We're going to correct it in the end when we put it back together. Okay, once you have these loose, now we can go ahead and access these screws, and these are also the smallest Allen 1.5 on here. Again, you might need some acetone to loosen them up. Okay, once you have these loose, we're ready to pull our axle out, but we want to be careful. We want to catch these. We have a lock nut, we have a washer, a wave washer, and then another washer. So there's 3 washers here two flat ones on the outer, and then a waffle washer in the middle, and that's so that you can adjust the tension. So as I'm pulling it out, I'm going to get these out one at a time. There's one of the washers and the lock nut. This is the wave washer. And then one more washer. So put those back in the same sequence. Washer, waffle washer, flat washer. Flat, waffle, flat, and then the lock nut. Okay, now we can continue pulling out the axle. Now that we've loosened this, and we can pull it out. And there it is. So if you were replacing this, you would just get your new miter gear and pull out your lock screws and put them back in the new one, and then put it back in reverse order. But we're going to go deeper. We're going to take this gear off. This is gear B, miter gear B. To get this gear off, you have some points that will help you to get it off. Under here, there's an Allen screw, and that's going to be a 2 millimeter Allen wrench to get that off. But while you have your Allen wrench in here, you're going to need to hold it somehow so it doesn't turn while you're trying to loosen it. So if you look in here, there's some area in here for you to get like a pin pointer and put it in there right in the corner to keep this gear from turning, so that you can release this lock screw. So if we're going to put our pin right in here, right to hold the gear from turning. Just insert it so that gear won't turn, and then you can release your Allen screw. It might be pretty tight also. It might have Loctite on it, so you're going to have to put some acetone on it. And so we're going to take this Allen screw out. So now we have access to our miter gear B, and you'll notice that it's got a little area to put a screwdriver in. So we're going to put our screwdriver in here, just like we did the lock screw. This is going to keep the gear from turning up top, so that now I can loosen with the screwdriver. And it might be pretty tight. Okay, once you've unscrewed it, just pull it straight out. Now, this bearing behind it might want to come with it. So if you want to keep pushing it in or hold it in while you're pulling out this gear, that would be good. But if it comes out, you'll just have to insert that bearing assembly back in. And you'll notice that there is a washer here. A washer that goes on this miter gear. So when you're putting it back together, you're going to want to make sure this thin washer is on here. So if it's there, it might come off, but that washer needs to be there. And as you can see, this miter gear is cracked. And so when we were turning our knob, every time it came to that crack, it had a hesitation, and it wasn't smooth. And a doctor might find that irritating. He might want it changed. So I don't have a new one put on, so we're just going to put this one back on until we get a new one. Okay. So if you have a new one, make sure your washer is on, either here or here. I'd say put it on here so you don't lose it. And then once again, fit it right in the center. You might need to use your pointer to hold the gear on top from turning while you turn the miter gear back into position. So it should be turning. If something's not turning, then it's not going in correctly. Okay, if everything's turning, then you can go ahead and tighten the miter gear with your screwdriver in the two notches that are in the end of that gear, and get it pretty tight. You don't want it to just snug tight, okay? Okay, everything's moving freely, so we're good. Now we can put our Allen screw back in. Our lock screw, and we can put our pointer back into the gears to keep them from turning. Okay, that's firm. You might want to put some Loctite back in there, or some fingernail polish. Put that in there like the factory does. Okay, so that is set and it's moving freely. We don't have to worry about aligning it just yet. Now it's time to put our axle with our miter gear A back in. So we'll get our axle that's got this spacer washer, and it also has a thin washer on the end. Make sure those are still on, and we're just going to reinsert it, and our miter gear A in there. Oops. Get the one with the screws. Okay, we're going to slide it in. Make sure it's behind the gear. And now it's time to put our washers back on. And I don't need to say it again because you already know it. 3 washers, flat, waffle, flat. They go on. And then our lock nut. Now you want to put this side out, because that can help you if you have a different kind of a tool. Okay, now we're going to go in and we're just going to tighten that lock screw up by turning this knob. We did loosen that earlier. Make sure it's going on smoothly. Be careful, these threads are very delicate, so you don't want to start cross-threading it at the very beginning. That would not be good. Okay, once you can turn as much as you can with your hand, see we've got too much space in here, so we're going to need to tighten that up. And one of the observations you may have wanted to make was to see how it felt before you took it apart. Did it feel firm? No spacing? So the more observations you can make before you start taking everything apart, that will help you when you're putting it back together. Okay, now we're just going to tighten. And all we're going to do is we're just going to tighten until we run out of, until it's not wiggling anymore. Just when it begins to touch. You can still hear it. That's got a little bit of room. So we'll just tighten it a little bit more until we can't hear it anymore. Everything is turning smoothly, so it's okay to go ahead and tighten up this lock screw again with our 0.9 millimeter Allen wrench. Tighten our lock screw back up. Okay, we're not going to put our knob on yet, because now it's going to be time to remember this is what we're going for, the small one. But also remember, this is going to be how we'll know where we're at, because there's going to be a click here and a click here. So once we find out where this area is, then we know the click right after this click, right after this one, that's going to be our 0.3, and that's where we're going to tighten up our gear, because that will be in position. One way we can find out is we'll turn it. We know we're good. If we were turning the numbers to go this way, then we'll know that between 1 and 14 it's going to be that space. And we're going to be turning this way, so we're going to be turning to the right. And so I hear a click, 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 click. Ah, here's the area where our little whale is, between 14 and 1, because there's no click. There's a click there and a click there. That must be the 1, and that's the 14. That's the 1. So I'm going to move it over one more to the 0.3, line it up, 0.3, push my gear in, tighten it up. Check it. Ah, okay, now that's right. So our click stops on that whale are at 1 and 14. So our 0.3 is lined up. So okay, everything is lined up now. I can still feel that hesitation because that gear is cracked. So every time I get to that crack, I can feel it as it hits that other gear. But Now our 0.3 is lined up with our smallest hole because the next one is the beginning of the well. It slides until the end of the well, the small 14, and then it goes to the large 14. Okay. Hope I'm not overdoing that explanation, but there it is. Once you have that tight and it looks like it's moving freely and there's no space, go ahead and tighten down your other lock screw on your gear, because you know you're in the right spot. Okay, should be working pretty good. And then we'll get our knob, and once again we'll go to 0.3, and we'll find our 0.3 here, line it up with the hole, with the dot, and tighten it up. Now you don't have to worry about how far you're pushing it in, because it stops before it goes too far. This axle is fatter here, and it won't go past this spot. So you just push it in, and it will stop. So you don't have to worry about spacing it like you do on other knobs. If you like it, then you tighten it up. And your 0.3s line up, so everything looks good. Now it's time to put our wire harness back on. And our clamp, it's going to go in the first hole. We're going to push it in, and we know our clamp is going to be on the outside of this connector, so we'll just put it on the outside. Okay. Outer surface. These little tabs. Is hitting the frame. That tab is. This tab is hitting this frame. So, and this is on this side, locked in between these 2 points. And as we look at our angle, it looks like we're in the right angle, because this tab is resting up against there, so it's nice and firm. Put our bowl back in. Put our cover back on. And if you have a screw, if you look through this little window, you can see where the screw is, and you can use that to help you line up that screw. Check your operation and put it back on the slit lamp, and verify that you've got the alignment correct. So if you wanted to change it, you could, loosen your knobs and coincide that way. That would be another way. If you didn't want to go back in here and do that, if it's too confusing, then just loosen the knobs and turn them to where it corresponds to the correct diaphragm. And then put it back on. I wanted to show you the diagrams. Here's the miter gear A, and as you can see we took off these things, your lock nut, there's your washers and your waffle washer in between them, and there's your miter gear A. I'll just show you these. And then here's your miter gear B. And that's the number. And there's the screw, there's the little bearing. But I'll show you these. And here are the part numbers. There's your miter gear A. And there's your miter gear B. So those are some other numbers if you need to know. Just a reminder that you're going to need a 0.9 mil, a 1.5, and a 2 mil. And these are the numbers of your gears that you're going to need to order from Topcon.